Atsushi Nakajima is an 18-year-old orphan who is being hunted by a mystical tiger he doesn't even know about. After being kicked out of his orphanage, Atsushi's life takes a wild turn when he saves Osamu Dazai, a quirky detective investigating the same tiger. Together with Dazai's partner, they solve the mystery, leading Atsushi to join a firm of supernatural investigators where he must use his skills and powers to solve unique cases the police can't handle. One bowl of tea on rice, pickled plums, silvered nori, and leftover chicken from dinner, all doused in piping hot water and shoveled in with salted kelp. A boy who looks as starved as an average African kid remembers all the bowls of tea on rice he'd make at the orphanage after sneaking into the kitchen, like some sort of expert ninja. He suddenly collapses and realizes he's going to die of hunger. Someone get this boy a Big Mac. He introduces himself as Atsushi and says he's going to die from starvation now due to certain circumstances. After being driven out of the orphanage, he had nowhere to sleep, nothing to eat, and as one might expect, not a cent to his name. Let me present this information in more simplified terms. He's a broke-ass bitch. He admits he doesn't have the courage to commit theft even after all this, which is why he's arrived in this current predicament. He grunts and slowly gets up, telling himself that if he wishes to live, he has no choice but to steal and take from others. He suddenly has flashbacks of the orphanage heads kicking him out, calling him a good-for-nothing and saying no one would welcome the like of him, as well as declaring that the world would be a better place if he just went off and died in a ditch somewhere. Damn, they roasted the hell out of this guy. He angrily says he's not gonna die and is going to live no matter what it takes. He stones himself and decides to rob the first person who comes along this path, but a runner rushes by him. Undeterred, he admits that was mission impossible and gets ready for the next target, but a large group of military professionals march by, and he hurriedly remarks that he isn't sure military guys would be going around with their wallets on them. He suddenly senses someone behind him and swivels around to see a man sinking in the lake. Shocked, he decides to pass on this one as well, but rushes into the water to get him. In the end, he acknowledges that he saved a life before the man suddenly gets up in shock and angrily realizes he made it. Surprised, Atsushi wonders what he means, so the man gets up and reveals that he was trying to commit suicide. Of course, out of everyone he could have found, the protagonist ran into a handsome suicidal maniac. Atsushi wonders if he's going to get scolded for literally saving someone's life, but the man admits his priority is to commit a clean suicide, yet he troubled him. He decides to apologize in some way and notices how starved Atsushi looks, so he admits he's also hungry, but the river seems to have taken his wallet with it. A man called Kunikita angrily calls the man from across the river and says he's had enough of him disrupting his schedule. The man ignores him and tells Atsushi that Kunikita is a colleague of his from work so they can have him treat them to a meal. He asks Atsushi what he'd like to eat, so he grudgingly replies that he'd like some tea on rice. Amused, the man tells Kunikita to treat Atsushi the 30 bowls of tea on rice. He introduces himself as Dazai Osamu as Kunikita tells him to not get carried away with his money. At the restaurant, Atsushi savagely gobbles up his meal like the broke bum that he is, while Kunikita annoyingly examines how much his schedule has been disrupted. Once Atsushi's done with his meal, he expresses gratitude for the meal
Oh, thanks, man.
and reveals that he hasn't had anything to eat and anywhere to sleep since he's come to Yokohama after getting kicked out of the orphanage. When Atsushi inquires about their jobs, Kunikita reveals that they're from the Armed Detective Agency, an organization with individuals possessing supernatural powers. Shocked, Atsushi remembers the rumors about them and wonders if these two also have special powers. He asks about what their job is today, but stops himself since it must be super secretive. Kunikita reveals that this one isn't that secret since they're looking for a certain tiger on behalf of the military. When Atsushi looks confused, he explains that it's a man-eater who has been seen around this area for some time, although they're not sure it's eaten anyone yet, but it's been ransacking warehouses and eating farm produce for a while now. Atsushi falls down in shock and tries to run away, but Kunikita stops him and asks what he knows. He alarmingly says it's after him and has been relentlessly trying to kill him, so he has to run away if it's been seen around this area. Kunikita annoyingly tells him that he can either pay for his food with his arm or by telling them everything. Dazai asks what he knows about the tiger, so he slowly gets up from the ground and explains that his orphanage was trashed by the tiger, it ravaged their fields and chicken coop, but no one died. Unfortunately, the orphanage was already on a very tight budget and he got kicked out so that they would have fewer mouths to feed. He explains that it shows up wherever he goes and has probably entered the city in search of him now. Kunikita agrees that what he says lines up with the information they have, so Dazai asks Atsushi if he has time now and reveals that he can help them look for the tiger. He hands Kunikita a note to give to the company president and tempts Atsushi with a cash reward for helping them find the tiger, so he reluctantly agrees. In an abandoned warehouse, Dazai reads a guide about committing suicide and assures Atsushi that he's really strong before Atsushi suddenly hears something behind him as the moon comes out from the clouds. Dazai is unfazed and says the wind probably knocked something down. Atsushi hurriedly says it's come to get him, but Dazai tells him to calm down and says tigers don't just show up somewhere. He explains that there was something odd from the beginning and questions why an orphanage would banish a child just because their budget wasn't enough. It's not really a farm, so kicking out a few mouths would hardly make a difference in their budget, and it takes way more to downsize an entire orphanage. He stands up and explains that the tiger and Atsushi both came into this city 2 weeks ago and reminds him that the armed detective agency is comprised of people with supernatural powers.
Wow.
Atsushi suddenly starts jerking weirdly as Dazai continues to explain that there are quite a few individuals who possess powers in the world. Some use their powers to achieve great success, while others fall into ruin as a result of not being able to control said powers. Atsushi's body starts wildly transforming, and he transforms into a giant white tiger. Dazai says the orphanage staff probably knew who the tiger was, and Atsushi was the only one who wasn't aware of the situation. Out of control, Atsushi starts attacking him, but he swiftly dodges and acknowledges his strength, remarking that it wouldn't be so bad to meet one's end by being killed by a beast, but Atsushi can't kill him. He uses his ability No Longer Human and touches Atsushi, explaining that his ability allows him to render any other ability null through simply touching them. Atsushi reverts back to his human form and falls down before Kunikita suddenly appears and is mildly surprised to learn that Atsushi is the white tiger. Kunikita tells him to explain more clearly next time since he had to bring in guys who weren't on duty today. Yoseno Akiko is surprised to learn there aren't any casualties. At Ogawa Ramp tells Dazai he's come a long way, though there's still time before he can get to his level, and Miyazawa Kenji asks what they're going to do with Atsushi, who's lying unconscious. Dazai remembers what Atsushi told him about his situation and cheerily says they'll make him one of them. Atsushi wearily gets up and doesn't remember anything about when transformed, so Dazai points out the fact that his right hand is still a tiger. Shocked, Atsushi panics and asks what the hell this is, so Dazai calms him down and says he'll be a member of the armed detective agency from now on. Atsushi wakes up and wonders what happened last night. He suddenly checks his right hand but sees that it's back to normal, so he calms himself and sees he's in an actual house. He gets a call from Dazai, who cheerily bids him a good morning like bro when he had a little too much to drink. Dazai asks him how the dorm is and says the change of clothes near his mattress is a gift from everyone in the agency. Grateful, Atsushi thanks him for everything he's done for him before Dazai informs him that there's been an emergency and tells him to come to a specified location immediately since it's a crisis and only he can help. Atsushi says he understands and quickly gets dressed, but upon leaving his house, he sees that Dazai is stuck in a drum and asks what the crisis is. He happily says he'd heard there was a way to commit suicide by getting into an oil drum, so he decided to give it a shot, but now he's just suffering without being able to actually die. On top of that, since he's stuck this deep, there's no way for him to get out. Atsushi remarks that it's still a way to commit suicide, so Dazai says he likes suicide, but he doesn't like suffering or pain, and he learned after getting into the drum that this is a torture method. Atsushi goes full monologue mode and remembers what happened with him last night as Dazai gets out of the drum and thanks him for his help since he would have snapped his waist into two without his help. Atsushi asks if he didn't call his other co-workers for help, so he annoyingly says he called them and hurriedly said he was on death's door, but they just congratulated him instead. Atsushi confirms that everyone in the agency is gifted with supernatural powers and says he won't be able to join in that case since he can't control himself in his tiger form and isn't even able to transform at will. He thanks him for his help and decides to look for a job he can actually handle, though it probably won't be easy to find. Dazai says he has an idea for a potential job and can help him get it if he wants, so Atsushi happily takes him up on his offer. As they're going, Dazai informs him that there may be a test of sorts and says he'll be fine if he can't read or write. Bro's being taken to Finland. Kunikita suddenly spots them and furiously tells Dazai off, so he questions when there was ever a complaint against him, so Kunikita starts reading the list of complaints against him, distressing Dazai. Seeing him squabble, Atsushi wonders if it was actually a good idea to ask for his help in finding a job before Kunikita says they should hurry to the agency since a bomber has taken a hostage and holed himself up in their office. A man at the office grabs a girl by her collar, angrily declaring that he can't take it anymore and telling the staff to bring the president to him or he'll blow everyone here to bits. As Atsushi, Kunikita, and Dazai are hiding behind a plant, he wonders why he's here and asks if he can go now. Kunikiva admits that they do attract a lot of ill will, and Dazai notices that the explosive is very strong, so if the bomber detonates it, the entire floor is as good as gone. They might be able to mitigate the force of the explosion if they can find something to cover the explosive with, but it doesn't look possible. He explains that the woman is Naomi, a part-time assistant at their office hearing, which Atsushi realizes she's a completely innocent bystander. Kunikiva admits they can't let the president in front of the bomber like this, so it's good that he's on vacation. Atsushi wonders if they're going to use their powers, but he and Dazai just play rock, paper, scissors for who's going to approach him, and Kunikita loses. The bomber forces Kunikita to place his hands on the desk, seeing which Dazai realizes he's done his homework on the agency member's abilities, and he won't be able to do anything if he goes, so he slowly says Atsushi's name. Atsushi gets a really bad feeling and denies before he can complete his sentence since he doesn't have a death wish, so Dazai seriously explains that he's the only one who the bomber might not know about and they just need him to distract him for a while since they can do the rest. He gives him some newspapers as props and tells him to put on an off-putting act, so Atsushi lamely approaches the bomber and asks what he wants to accomplish, warning him that doing this will make his parents very sad. I bet that worked like a charm. The bomber asks who he is, so he fearfully says he's just a newspaper delivery boy who happened to pass by. He explains to the bomber that he shouldn't take hostages or use bombs since he's sure there's something to live for. When the bomber asks for an example, Atsushi becomes flustered and says tea on rice. Man, he's really obsessed with this one dish. He tells the bomber that he can sleep somewhere with a roof on his head and can wake up to a new day when he goes to sleep at night. Every day is a new day. But if he blows up, neither him nor anyone else here will see another new day because they'll be goddamn dead. Atsushi explains his tragic backstory of how he was kicked out of an orphanage and had nowhere to go. He feels like the scum of society and lacks any redeeming qualities, but he still manages to keep on living without thinking of killing himself. Dazai remarks that he really is acting like a worthless human down to an art form as Atsushi tells the bomber that he can throw the bomb aside and they can find new jobs together, totally forgetting that he was a newspaper boy. Flustered, the bomber says he doesn't want a job before Kunikita uses his ability, Dappo Poet, and creates a wired gun to get close to the bomber and slam him down on the ground. Dazai tells them they did a good job and instantly starts messing with Kunikita before the bomber manages to get free and says everyone with superpowers has something wrong with them before pressing the button. The 30-second timer starts and he wrestles Kunikita to the ground as Atsushi remembers that they need something to cover the force of the explosion. He quickly throws the hostage towards Dazai to save them and hugs the bomb as much as he can while covering it from the others. He braces himself for the explosion, but nothing happens. Dazai happily remarks that he has the talent to become a suicidal maniac and asks the bomber Tanizaki if he agrees. Naomi, the hostage who's actually Tanizaki's sister, happily hugs him and praises him for his acting, telling him to continue tying her up when they get home. This relationship is definitely sus and very curiosity. Atsushi asks if this was all an act, so Kunikita tells him to blame Dazai and himself for asking him of all people to find him a job. Dazai says he did tell him there was a test involved before the company president, Fukuzawa Yukichi, enters. Dazai explains that he recommended that they hire Atsushi, but since he's been designated a major threat by the ward, there was disagreement among them as to whether or not they should take him in. Kunikita asks the president what he's decided, so he decides to let Dazai decide. Dazai remarks that he's passed the test and welcomes Atsushi to the armed detective agency. Tanizaki congratulates him, but he worryingly says he can't join a workplace as violent and reckless as this. Dazai assures him that he'll be fine since not everyone can use their body as a shield against a bomb. He admits they can't force him if he still wants to refuse, but then he can't help but worry for his future since they'll need him to vacate the company dorm. He doesn't have any specialized skills, nor does he have any friends or contacts, so finding a job will be very difficult. On top of all that, he's a wanted tiger and will definitely be fired if anyone found out about this. At worst, he might even get shot or captured, but it'd be a different story if he was a part of this agency. Naomi says she looks forward to working with him. Kunikita tells him to follow the rules, and Dazai remarks that it's settled then. In a restaurant, Tanizaki apologizes to Atsushi for being rude to him and explains he works as an assistant at the agency. Atsushi assures him that it's fine and remarks that he really isn't a bad person and is bemused to learn that he and Naomi are siblings. He says he doesn't really see a family resemblance, so she seductively says they really are siblings while flirting with Tanizaki. Kunikita tells him to not pursue the line of inquiry with them too far to not bring shame to the agency's name since the rest of them are committed to it as well. Meanwhile, Dazai is delicately examining the hands of the restaurant mistress and asks if she would like to strangle him. As Kunikita starts strangling him instead, Atsushi asks what they did before joining the agency, so Dazai tells him to take a guess, explaining that it's a game they play often. The rookies try to guess their seniors' former occupations as part of training them to be private investigators. Atsushi guesses that Tamazaki and Naomi were still students since he seems to be close to his age. He guesses that Kunikiya was a teacher, and Dazai admits that's close since he was a math teacher. Finally, Atsushi wonders what Dazai did, but as he's deeply thinking, he isn't able to decide on one, so Kunikiya tells him to not bother since Dazai's former profession is one of the 7 mysteries of the agency, but the first person who gets it will receive a reward. Hearing there's a reward, Atsushi asks what the reward is, and after discovering that it's 700 grand, he asks if he can really claim it if he guesses right. Tanizaki remarks that he looks excited as Atsushi declares that this reward will be his and starts naming jobs one after another. Kunikiya remarks that he was probably just lying around doing nothing, but Dazai says he would never lie about this and asks Atsushi if he's decided to yield. Tanizaki receives a call, informing him that there's a job, so they decide to head back, and Dazai says they'll save the guessing game for later. They return to find a woman who says she would like to ask for an investigation before Dazai starts praising her beauty and asks if she would like to join him in a double suicide before being punched by Kunikiya. Kunikiya takes him into a room and asks the woman to explain the situation to Tanizaki and Atsushi while he takes care of some things. The woman carries on and says there have been some distasteful people dressed in rags hanging around in her company building's back alley, so she thinks they're smugglers. Kunikiya agrees that they're unavoidable in a port town, and she says they could reach out to the military police if they had some sort of evidence against them, so she wants them to stake out the place for evidence. Kunikiya tells Atsushi to go since it's a harmless job and would be perfect for him. As assurance, he sends Tanizaki and Naomi with him, so Atsushi packs his bag before Kunikiya shows him a picture of a man and advises Atsushi to not run into him, and to run if he does since he's part of a mafia, a vicious criminal organization who claims the port as their territory and are called the Port Mafia since they're the most dangerous bunch in the underground world of this city. The man in this picture is particularly dangerous and is out of the agency's reach because he's gifted and his ability is of the ruthless sort, specialized for slaughter. He says his name is Akutagawa and he's out of even the military's reach. Ryunosuke Akutagawa enters a police office and says he wants to deposit a bag for lost and found, but they instantly recognize him, so he brutally slaughters them and leaves as the place blows up. As Atsushi's heading to the alley, he remarks that he isn't sure if he's cut out for this, so Tanizaki assures him he'll be fine since even his ability isn't suited for combat. Arriving at the alley, he tells the woman, Higuchi, that smugglers will always have an escape route since they're cowards, but this seems to be a dead end. If anyone came, they would have nowhere to run. Higuchi admits that's true and apologizes for leading them to a trap, revealing that her true target was them. She informs Akutagawa that she has them, so he says he'll be there in 5 minutes, and they alarmingly realize she's with the Port Mafia. As she starts shooting, Naomi hurriedly stands in front of Tanizaki and takes the bullets from him, so he alarmingly tells Atsushi to grab her legs so that they can take her to an infirmary. Higuchi aims her gun at his head and says her investigation has already revealed he's a non-combatant member and gets ready to kill him, so he furiously activates his ability, Light Snow, and tells Atsushi to stay back because this one is his to kill. Snow suddenly starts falling around them and he disappears, explaining that his ability transforms everything under the snow into a screen and he's overlaid the background scenery into his image so she can't see him anymore. She says bullets will still harm him, but he reveals that that's wrong as well and starts strangling her from behind. She starts gasping like a fish out of water before Akutagawa suddenly stabs him from behind and introduces himself. He slaps Higuchi for gunning everything around her down since his orders were to take the war tiger alive. He tells Atsushi that his colleagues who are lying on the ground just got caught in the crossfire because he has always been the real target and will cause woe for everyone around him like some sort of bad luck charm. He activates his ability Rashomon and shows Atsushi its power, declaring that it has poor taste and devours absolutely everything, so he wants to take him alive, but if he resists, it will take his leg. Atsushi remembers what Kunikiya said and rushes towards Akutagawa before grabbing the gun and shooting him, but he says his beast devoured the very bullets meant to kill him, and that move was a fool's last stand. Atsushi questions how he's supposed to land a hit on him before Akutagawa declares that he's a man who keeps his word before Rashomon bites Atsushi's leg off. Atsushi starts screaming in pain and remembers how he's always been abandoned and was never allowed to cry. His right leg suddenly regenerates and he transforms into the war tiger before rushing towards Akutagawa and managing to land an attack on him. He quickly rushes at him from behind next, but Dazai gets between them and nullifies both Rashomon and Atsushi's beast beneath the moonlight. He tells Atsushi to get up since he doesn't want to carry 3 people back as Higuchi realizes she was bugged and he'd seen through her plans. Akutagawa tells her to not fight him since she can't win. He tells Dazai that they'll retreat this time, but the War Tiger will be the Port Mafia's one day because there's a 7 billion bounty on him. Higuchi declares that a small agency will have no chances against them and will be effortlessly crushed because the Port Mafia is infinitely stronger and has connections all over the world. Dazai remarks that he knows that which Akutagawa agrees with since, after all, he is an ex-member of the Port Mafia. Atsushi wakes up in an infirmary beside Kunikita, who informs him that Yosano is treating Tanizaki next door and Mayumi is okay. Yosano sees the injury Tanizaki has racked up and decides to give him the extra special treatment while unbuttoning her shirt. "I can fix her." Hearing the screams, Atsushi questions if that's treatment before Kunikita says he heard Atsushi has a 7 billion bounty on his bed, so the Port Mafia being after him isn't much of a surprise. Atsushi starts panicking, so Kunikita tells him to stay calm, since not keeping one's cool can cause problems for even the most skilled. Atsushi points out that his books are upside down, stunning him before he quickly fixes it, and screams that he hasn't lost his cool and won't panic at all. Atsushi sees him panicking and admits the agency's situation must be pretty dire, all because of him. Kunikita tells him to think about what he can do and leaves. Meanwhile, a Port Mafia member is informed that it's time, so he breaks open a door with his ability and his men rush into a warehouse, informing the workers that they're in a bit of a rush and have heard rumors that an unruly bunch has been selling Port Mafia cargo on the black market, so they're just looking for evidence. A worker rushes at him with a crowbar, which he effortlessly stops before killing the worker, leaving and telling his men to kill them all. As they start shooting, he sighs and says the best smokes are always after a job well done. Atsushi notices an explosion and wonders what's going on. He visits the site to check and hears that the Port Mafia's most violent military squad, the Black Lizard, did it. Shocked, he wonders what would happen if they attack the agency. He heads to a phone booth and calls the Port Mafia. Higuchi picks up and realizes he saw the business card she left at the agency. She warns him that his colleagues saved him that day, but it won't happen again. So he tells her that he's going to quit the agency and go on the run alone, or they can catch him if they want to. She smiles and asks if she wants them to call off the war on the agency. "Guys, she's kind of making me feel things." Atsushi just puts the phone down, so she calls the Black Lizards. Later, as Atsushi's leaving the agency building, Kumikita tells him to help carry some files since they're preparing for the worst-case scenario, but Atsushi tells him to not worry because it won't happen anymore and the agency is safe now. He leaves as Kunikita calls for him and asks where he's running off to. In an alley, Black Lizard commanders Tachiwara Mishizu and Jin meet the leader, Hiratsu Ryuru, who informs Higuchi that they're here and asks where the target is that takes 3 of them to crush, so she explains that their target is the armed detective agency. The previous attempt failed because the agency intervened, so they won't make the same mistake twice and will annihilate the agency first to prevent them from acting as the Warrior's guard. She says leaving no survivors is fine with her and declares that she can't have Akutagawa taking a backseat to a mere detective agency. Akutagawa visits a girl who's sitting in a cell, facing away from him, and almost attacks her with his Rishumen, admitting her resolve is admirable, so he will give her a reason to live. Meanwhile, Daze tells the restaurant mistress that he's finally found the reason he kept on living till now and exclaims that he's lived to this day so that he can be in a double suicide with her. The woman tells him to feel free to do it on his own and asks if he has a proper life insurance policy because he's racked up quite a tab. If he doesn't have one yet, she would be happy to refer him to one. Daze says her vitality is binding, so she says if that's the best he's got for changing the subject, she'll go ahead and barge into his agency on the 4th floor. Upon arriving at the agency, the leader, Hiratsu, breaks down the door and barges into the office with his men, remarking that they forgot to knock and make an appointment, so he hopes they'll overlook these mishaps since their errand will be over soon enough. As his men point their guns at the agency members, Atsushi stops while walking and remembers everything the orphanage heads said to him. He admits they were right and there's really nowhere he can belong. He suddenly hears gunshots and realizes the agency's being attacked, so he rushes back and questions why this is all happening because of him. He arrives to see Kunikita slamming Hiratsu into the ground and the other agency members easily taking down the lackeys. When they're done with everyone, Kunikita sees he's finally back and says this is why he hates raids. They really mess up their budget proportions. Yosama tells Kunikita that it's his turn to go around the neighborhood with apologies and gifts. Looking around, Atsushi questions if this is the Port Mafia military squad said to be on par with special ops before Kenji throws the lackeys out the window. Kunikita says he wishes they would stop these raids, hearing which Atsushi realizes the agency is far more violent than the Port Mafia. Kunikita remarks that he can't believe Atsushi just wandered off like that when he should be thinking about what he can do for the agency. Atsushi realizes what he meant and slowly starts crying tears of happiness before turning away. Kunikita says he goes off to play when given a job like the generation he's in and cries if anyone gives him a single word of criticism, so Atsushi hurriedly says that's not it, and that isn't what he's crying about. As the agency is cleaning up, Atsushi sees Rampo isn't doing anything and asks Kunikita if he isn't going to help before Rampo informs them all that he's heading out for a job soon since the police in this city can't even capture a single criminal in this city without his help. Still, since his ultra deduction power is so incredible, it's no small wonder that so many people depend on him. Kunikita says they're indebted to him, and Rampo starts leaving, remarking that they don't have the deductive powers of a monkey even when they call themselves a detective agency. As the others praise him, Kunikita tells Atsushi to go with Rampo since the location's close by train. Atsushi says being a detective's assistant is a big responsibility, but Rampo reveals it's because he doesn't know how to take the train. As they're going, Atsushi admits he's surprised since Rampo doesn't know anything about commuting, so he probably isn't able to do much without his ability. The investigator on the scene introduces himself as Minoura and says they no longer need them or their agency. Rampo says that's idiotic because every case in the world should be overseen by a great detective, but Minoura says they won't be needing a private investigator today because the victim is his subordinate. He uncovers the body of a wounded lady, and the officer explains she was found floating in the river today and was shot 3 times in the chest. They don't know where or when she was killed, and haven't found the bullets yet. Minoura says there aren't any suspects, and as far as everyone in the office knows, she wasn't in a relationship either. Rampo asks if that means they don't have any leads, so Minoura says they can't let some amateur private investigator handle this before they're suddenly informed that their nets caught a man, but it just turns out to be Dazai, who was just drifting along and is apparently on the lookout for a beautiful woman who will die with him since he's decided to commit a double suicide. He asks what they're doing here. Atsushi explains he's on a job. Devastated to learn that a young, beautiful woman in her prime has lost her life, Dazai exclaims that his sorrow is crushing his heart like some cheap Shakespeare clone before Minoura asks who he is. Rampo tells Dazai he hasn't gotten the job yet, so Minoura remarks that they have no need for a private investigator when his team is far superior. Rampo swivels around and asks an officer what his name is, so he introduces himself as Sergeant Sugimoto and says the victim, Ms. Yamajuwa, was his senior colleague. Rampo cheerily tells him to solve this case in 60 seconds from now, claiming that he can solve it under a minute, so if he's as good as Minoura says, he should be able to do the same. Sugimoto panics for a whole 10 seconds before remarking that Yamajuwa was pursuing a political corruption case and also investigating the port mafia. He believes the murderer's method is similar to that of the mafia, so she might have been killed by them. Dazai says that's not true because the port mafia's retaliatory methods are as highly specific as a government ID. The traitor is first forced to bite the curb, then the back of their head is kicked to shatter their jaw, like how it used to happen to Grandma when she didn't make the meal on time. As the victim is writhing in agony, they flip him over, then shoot him in the chest 3 times, so the MO is similar to the mafia's, but it was intended as a cover-up. Sugimoto can't believe they would shoot the victim 2 extra times for that before Rampo suddenly reminds him that his time is over and says he's got a ways to go before he reaches his level, so this at least proved that Minoura's subordinates aren't as great as him. As Minoura gets annoyed by Rampo, Dazai assures him that he's always like this, and Minoura agrees to see this ability of his if he thinks so highly of himself and asks if he wants him to count to 60. Rampo says he doesn't need that long, as Dazai tells Atsushi to watch closely because this ability keeps the agency going. Rampo puts on his glasses and activates Ultra Deduction as Atsushi wonders if him instantly revealing the truth can actually be possible. Rampo says, "I see," and calmly points towards Sugimoto, declaring that he is the killer. Minoura doesn't believe it and says it's impossible that the killer would happen to be this close in the first place. Rampo says he wants to stay close to the investigation because he is the killer, and says he also knows where the evidence lies. He asks Sugimoto for his gun, but he says the penalty for handing a government-issued firearm to a civilian is far worse than a pay cut, so Rampo says if they examine the gun and come up empty, then he truly will just be an idiot running his mouth. Frustrated, Minoura tells Sugimoto to show him the gun so that he can leave and stop wasting their time. Sugimoto doesn't answer and looks down, so Rampo remarks that even in this city, it isn't easy to find ammo, especially when the firearm is government-issued, so Sugimoto is thinking furiously right now about the 3 bullets he's used and how he'll explain their disappearance. Minoura angrily tells Sugimoto to show him the gun now because he can't be the killer, so he slowly takes it out but points it at them instead. Dazai tells Atsushi to go, so he rushes forward and tackles him to the ground. He hurriedly says he has nothing to do with this, so Rampo starts explaining that the murder took place early yesterday morning at the abandoned shipyard some distance from here. If they go there, they should be able to find footprints of the victim and him. Minoura says they should hear the rest of the story back at the office. At the office, Sugimoto explains that she was going after a huge politician and actually found evidence of a major Diet member's crime. However, the member tried to use a mole inside the police to get rid of evidence. Rampo says Sugimoto is the spy, so he explains that he'd failed the police exam 3 times and was depressed before a man reached out to him, asking if he wanted to be a cop. After joining the force, he had to follow his orders in return, but he didn't kill Yamajuwa. He was trying to warn her and revealed she would get killed if she didn't give up the evidence, but Sugimoto tells Yamajuwa that the politician is taking this very seriously and points his gun at her, asking her to hand over the evidence because if he fails in this, the politician will call a hitman next. Yamajuwa tells him to hand over the gun because he can't shoot her. He gravely agrees and points the gun at his head instead, declaring that he'll choose a different way to force her instead. She rushes towards him to stop him, but accidentally gets shot in the chest instead. Rampo says he was panicking and didn't have anyone else to go to for help, so he called the Diet member who told him to destroy the evidence, so he fired 2 more shots as ordered to make it seem like the mafia did it and set her adrift into the river. Minoru asks Sugimoto where the evidence Yamajuwa found is before Rampo guesses that her last words to him were "I'm sorry." Sugimoto starts crying and reveals that the evidence is in his desk drawer. As they exit the office, Minoru thanks Rampo and apologizes for doubting his capabilities, admitting that they will ask for his help if they run into another difficult case, so Rampo cheerily agrees to give them a discount next time. While heading back, Atsushi admits he was amazing, so Dazai says he might have figured out half of how Rampo deduced it too. Surprised, Atsushi says Rampo's ability allows him to deduce his cases, so Dazai realizes he doesn't know yet and reveals that Rampo isn't actually gifted. He's just a very rare, ungifted civilian at the agency who himself thinks he has an ability. He explains that the reason why everyone at the agency respects him so much is because they know his deduction skills aren't a gift. Dazai admits he saw it himself for the first time too and reveals that while Rampo was deducing, he pinched his hair from behind. Since his ability nullifies any ability it touches, ultra deduction isn't an ability. He remarks that he could have figured it out too, because anyone who sees 3 bullet wounds would think they were fired at the same time, but Sugimoto said the culprit fired 2 extra shots, which means he knew the culprit had died by the first bullet. He admits Rampo caught on a lot more detail than him since he could tell what the location and the fact that she was threatened with a gun, but he probably guessed her final words because Sergeant Sugimoto and Yamagawa were dating. That's why he didn't kick her head in. Even though he knew it wouldn't look like the mafia's work, that would have been way too brutal for a lover. Dazai reveals that Rampo has solved many cases in the past and instantly determined the truth with the slimmest of leads and has never been wrong, once hearing which Atsushi says he now understands why everyone at the agency respects him so much as Rampo tells them to show him the way since he doesn't know where the agency is. Kunikita arrives at the office 10 minutes early and bids everyone good morning before Atsushi hurriedly asks for his help since there's something wrong with Dazai. Standing on his desk, Dazai manically claims that he has finally arrived in the afterlife, so Atsushi shows Kunikita the guide to suicide and a weird mushroom lying on Dazai's desk. Dazai claims that the guide was a masterpiece because he didn't know he just needed to eat some mushrooms to get such an entertaining way out. Kunikita sits down at his desk and starts working, explaining that he'll deal with him once he's done with his customary paperwork. Dazai pinches his cheeks and tells him to come with him to the afterlife, so he angrily slams him down before the secretary informs him that the president has assigned his case for the day. Later, as they're heading to the location, Kunikita explains that the case involves a series of disappearances in Yokohama, and they receive an anonymous tip stating that the victims have been abducted and imprisoned in a certain location, so they're going to investigate the anonymous tip source first. They arrive at a cyber network warrior's office where the guy introduces himself as Taguchi Rokuzo and says he's an informant who can dig up dirt on anything for the right price. He says the anonymous tip came from the Azure Messenger, but the mole doesn't seem to be a bad guy since they gave them the locations as well. Kunikita doesn't seem satisfied and says he wants him to keep looking into this. Outside, he calls a cab so that they can head to the abandoned hospital mentioned by the tipster. Dazai asks why he's looking after the hacker and questions if it's because his father's deceased, but he claims they only came here so that Atsushi could meet the informant, so he agrees to leave it at that. They get into a cab and Kunikita introduces the cab driver as another one of their informants, claiming he knows about Yokohama more than anyone he's seen. He starts squabbling with Dazai about an offhanded remark before they arrive at the hospital. Entering the building, they notice some fresh footprints and hear voices from the basement. They hurry downwards and find a woman sinking in a gigantic aquarium, so Kunikita quickly shoots it open. A while later, she introduces herself as Sasaki and says she blacked out at a station and was drowning in the tank when she regained consciousness. She says she heard some voices as well, so they start looking for other people, and Atsushi finds 3 men stuck in a room separated by a barrier. When they try to break the men out, gas suddenly starts leaking and Dazai hurriedly pulls Kunikita back, who fervently tries to break them out and claims that no one should die like this. Later, news is published about this case with a picture of Kunikita hammering the glass, seeing which he remarks that the culprit's true objective was to frame the agency. He visits the infirmary with Atsushi, where they find Dazai sitting beside Sasaki, who thanks them for their help and for letting her stay at their residence last night. Surprised, Atsushi asks where she stayed, so Dazai reveals that it was her house, shocking him and Kunikita as he wonders if that's something detectives are allowed to do. Outside, Kunikita asks Dazai if she's his kind of woman, so he says he likes all women, but she seems like the type who would commit suicide with him if he asked, which is nice. He asks Kunikita about his type and hands Atsushi his notebook, asking if he would like to read what Kunikita's type is. As Atsushi starts reading, he says this is too much in shock, and Dazai tells Kunikita to not share his vision of an ideal woman with an actual woman. My man's staying maidenless forever, just like 90% of you guys currently watching this video. When Dazai borrows his glasses to show off how good he looks, Kunikita realizes who the actual culprit is and takes the cab to an abandoned location where he reveals that the informant cab driver is the one behind the abductions. He took the victims' clothes after abducting them and made sure to check into wherever they were going so that the police wouldn't suspect him. The driver admits they're right and agrees to peacefully turn himself in if they agree to his conditions. He asks them to protect him for 72 hours while the prosecution concludes their questioning and arranges witness protection, since he was assured by an organization that he wouldn't be caught, but one of the people he abducted was apparently with the Port Mafia. The Port Mafia gangsters suddenly start firing at them, so he asks for help and runs away. Kunikita tells Dazai to pursue the driver so that they can get a testimony out of him and orders Atsushi to get a hold of the police and request backup. He quickly creates a flashbang with his ability to distract them. Dazai and Atsushi manage to escape before Akutagawa suddenly attacks the vehicle. Kunikita swiftly dodges his attacks and closes in before shooting. He supposedly misses, and Akutagawa declares that he doesn't need to use his ability if he can't even shoot straight, but Kunikita says his hobbies don't include murder. A pipe starts rapidly throwing water at Akutagawa before Kunikita creates a stun gun and throws it into the puddle, electrifying Akutagawa. Akutagawa wearily falls down and remarks that it appears the armed detective agency isn't filled with a bunch of entertainers before they hear the police approaching, so he decides to begrudgingly retreat for now. Kunikita, Dazai, and Atsushi later reach the building the cab driver used for his dealings, and they head inside to discover it's the place where the Azure King blew himself up. Dazai says he was an infamous terrorist who destroyed many national and corporate families. Atsushi is surprised to learn Kunikita was the one who deduced this was the Azure King's hideout, so he explains that the military, public bureau, and the police were working with each other, so the chain of command was in total chaos. Only 5 detectives arrived on time upon receiving the report, and the Azure King got wind of the police's actions, so he holed himself up with a bomb. A raid was set up after a conflicting set of orders, but ordinary detectives without any special training or abilities didn't stand a chance, and the Azure King blew himself up along with the 5 detectives after being cornered. Dazai remembers that one of the detectives was the hacker's father and says that's why he looks after him in his father's stead. They suddenly receive a report of a bomb that they have to disarm by sunset tomorrow, or else hundreds of people will be killed, but Kunikita tells Atsushi to not get worried because they won't let the bomb go off and will stop it for sure this time. Kunikita reads out the message left by the perpetrator to the agency members, and they wonder who the Azure messenger could be. Yosano remarks that it's all rigged so that if they fail, word of the agency's failure will spread like wildfire, and this attack would cause significant damage to them. Kenji raises his hand and asks if they still haven't been able to reach Rampo, but the secretary says he's working on a case in Kyushu. Fukuzawa announces that this case is a cowardly act using information to attack the armed detective agency, and they have 2 objectives. Uncover the true identity of the Azure messenger and disarm the bomb, although the bomb takes priority due to the time-sensitive nature, and if they are not able to stop it and hundreds of people lose their lives, they will no longer have the right to call themselves a detective agency. He tells them to think of this mission as a fight for the agency's existence and pride, so the agency members quickly head out. Kunikita calls Taguchi to ask if he can find the Azure messenger who sent them the message, but he asks what he really wants from him, so Kunikita asks him to ask about tracing the bomb-building equipment, warning him that he may be engaging in illicit activities, but should still make himself useful to society. Ticked off, Taguchi tells him to get off his high horse because he isn't his dad, and after cutting the call, he agrees, admitting that he can never be his father. Meanwhile, in the cafe, Sasaki tells Dazai that the situation of the agency looked very hectic and Kunikita seemed busy as well, but he cheerily says Kunikita is a workhorse and couldn't stop working for 2 minutes if he wanted to. Kunikita smacks him from behind and asks how he could go on a fancy afternoon date and ditch the meeting during an emergency, so Dazai teasingly asks if he's jealous and explains that his job is to ensure the safety of a victim and tend to her psychological well-being. Kunikita asks why he, who's the poster child for sloth and irresponsibility, has to be the one for the job. Besides, seeing her good looks, she's bound to have a boyfriend. Dazai says they apparently broke up recently and tells Kunikita he can do this, but he states that he only came here because Dazai skipped out on the meeting and needs to know what's going. Dazai says he knows the goal is to defame the agency, so Sasaki asks if an outsider like her can hear this stuff, but he says she's an active person of interest in this case and asks what class she teaches at her university. When she says it's social psychology, he asks what her view is on this case. She thinks about it and remarks that the Azure Messenger might be related to the Azure King or even be him, since he might not really be dead. Atsushi asks why he's going after the agency even if he's alive, so Dazai says Kunikita was the one who located his hideout, so he's the target here. Kunikita firmly states that the death of the Azure King was confirmed through forensic analysis, but Dazai tells him to stay on guard and says they need to protect Sasaki somewhere as well, but Kunikita furiously declares that he won't allow him to keep a lady in his room in the name of personal safety. Dazai tells him that he slept in an adjoining room when he first let her stay and didn't lay a finger on her, but he knew Kunikita would misunderstand and didn't correct him on purpose. Atsushi deeply wonders how they're both partners as Kunikita starts raging and pulling his hair like every Elden Ring Twitch streamer ever. Dazai tells Sasaki that Kunikita seems to like her a lot and asks what her type is, so she blushingly says it would be presumptuous of her to even have such a thing in mind, although she does think it is wonderful when a man strongly believes in his ideal and pours his heart and soul into it. Kunikita suddenly pauses and Dazai says they can continue with the rest, telling her that he may be a bit uptight, but he's a high-minded individual who lives and breathes for his ideals. He hands her his book of ideals and she takes a look before telling Kunikita that this goes too far before Atsushi finally receives a message from Rampo and informs them. As they're going, it's revealed that Rampo told them the bomb was in the fishing tackle store in Negishi, hearing which Dazai admits Rampo is amazing.
Most excellent!
Presently, Dazai asks Atsushi to show him the map and explains the terrorist target is the petrochemical complex. There are many large facilities that store oil and gas in Yokohama, so if an explosion were to occur close enough to ignite the storage tanks, the entire port will be engulfed in flames, which is why the fishing tackle store is the one place that checks all the boxes. The military police's bomb disposal squad finds the bomb, but it can't be moved due to the timer device, so it will be difficult to disarm it by sunset. They've begun evacuating the civilians, but there probably isn't going to be enough time. However, the bomb is set to deactivate if they can transmit a stop signal. Kunikita suddenly stops the car as he receives a call from Taguchi, informing him that someone recently ordered a transmitter and other equipment, and Rampo tells Atsushi the same, while the president tells Dazai that the driver has died. Atsushi questions how that's possible when he was under military protection, so he explains that he suddenly collapsed in the cell, but the numbers 00 were marked on his palm. Their car is suddenly attacked when they reach a former Defense Force facility with 20 minutes left until the car detonates. Kunikita quickly tells Dazai and Atsushi to find the transmitter and send the stop signal while he takes care of the attackers, so they rush to the room. Examining the control panel, Dazai realizes they need a release key to use the transmitter before a big brutish man appears behind them. A number suddenly appears on Kunikita's palm as a man starts inflicting pain on him using his ability and breaks the key, explaining that the victim dies when the number reaches 0. Meanwhile, Dazai is getting his ass kicked, so Kunikita quickly creates a grappling gun and flies into the room with the brute, while Dazai confronts the man and instantly nullifies his ability, defeating him. Kunikita swiftly takes down the brute despite the difference of size and weight in them and creates a release key before sending the signal and disarming the bomb. He tells Atsushi that his ability, Doppo Poet, lets him recreate anything if he's laid his eyes on it and understood its form and function. However, the object's size is limited to that of his book of ideals. Bro's a living photocopy machine. Later, Dazai calls Kunikita to an abandoned house where he explains that he found a survey which concludes that the best way to take over Yokohama would be by eradicating the port mafia first, but they were provided false information, so he sent an email to the real culprit. Taguchi arrives through a door and reveals that he hacked into Dazai's email to find out who the real culprit is. A bullet is suddenly fired towards Kunikita, so Taguchi pushes him away and gets shot. Dazai instantly points his gun to an open door and sees that Sasaki was the actual culprit behind this as she appears with a gun in her hands. She says her boyfriend was a man who lived for his ideals, which lead him to having blood on his hands. She asks Dazai if he will shoot her, when Kunikita is watching and he admits he can't and drops the gun. However, Taguchi, who's wearily lying on the ground, grabs it and shoots her, enacting his revenge. As she's lying in a pool of blood, Kunikita goes into a fit of rage and frustration. He questions what went wrong in all this and grabs Dazai by the collar, furiously telling him that this happened because of him. Dazai says this was the justice of the Azure King and Kunikita, and tells him that as long as he pursues his ideals, the flames that burnt in the Azure King will one day take root in him and raze everything around him to the ground. He angrily says he'll push on until he gets past it and tells Dazai to not underestimate his ideals. A small girl is standing alone in the corner of a street. She suddenly starts walking and grabs Dazai before activating her ability as he worryingly remarks that this doesn't look good. At the agency, Atsushi finds out that Dazai has gone missing, but the others aren't concerned since he's probably drowning in another lake somewhere. Atsushi remarks that he's still targeted by the Port Mafia though, but Kunikita doubts the Mafia alone will get the better of him. Tanizaki says he'll look into it, so Atsushi admits he was really scared when it all happened, so he's glad he's fine now. Tanizaki attributes it all to Yosano's treatment, so Kunikita asks him how many times she got to him, and he tragically says it was 4 times, telling Atsushi to not get injured as long as he's at this agency. Did my man just get sexually assaulted? Yosano arrives at the office and is saddened by the fact that Atsushi isn't hurt. She says she was looking for someone to go with her on a shopping trip, but it looks like he's the only one around. Confused, Atsushi turns around and realizes the others have deserted him like a bunch of dim-witted cowards. Later, while carrying numerous boxes, he asks her if she's still not done before the girl from before suddenly walks by him and takes a look at him. Watching her, Atsushi accidentally runs into a businessman who starts blabbering about how his suit is custom-made from a European brand, so Yosano apologizes on his behalf, but he slaps her hand away and declares that he'll lodge a complaint for them, asking if she's a tea mistress or something more specialized. She ruthlessly grabs his hand and tells him she's a doctor before asking if he would like her to take one of his arms from him. In the train, Atsushi apologizes to her for earlier, but she says there's nothing to be sorry about before starting to examine his leg. She says it looks fine even though she'd heard it was bitten off, noting it doesn't show any signs of scarring or fusion, which makes it more like restoration than regeneration. She notices Atsushi's worried look and lets go of it, telling him that she's sad she couldn't get to treat him. She warns him that the Mafia are known for surprise attacking and tells him to stay on guard from now. He admits he should learn how to protect himself on his own before the train conductor suddenly announces that they will now conduct a minor physics experiment with the passengers being their test subjects. He warns them that unless they surrender themselves, all passengers will be blown sky high. Yosano tells Atsushi that there are 3 options: turn yourself in, jump off the train with several dozen passengers to escape, or beat them up. She says they should split up and find the bombs. As she starts searching, she admits this plan is bold even for the Port Mafia and wonders who's behind this. She opens the door to another compartment but suddenly gets attacked by a bomb as the man behind it welcomes her and acknowledges her resilience as she wearily stands up. She recognizes him as a wanted criminal, Kajimoto Juru, and says he's a surprisingly well-known member despite being a member of the Port Mafia. He claims that death is an experiment because science in its ultimate form is God and death. Both exist and cannot be overcome by science, which is why they are drawn to them. Meanwhile, Atsushi is hurriedly going through the train and realizes everyone here will die if they're unable to disarm the bomb. The girl from before suddenly rushes into the rear car despite him stopping her. She's informed that there's a bomb in this car and her job is to protect it by using her ability Demon Snow to kill anyone who interferes. She activates her ability and instantly wounds Atsushi, who tries to stop her. He alarmingly realizes she's too strong and collapses, wondering why a little girl like her would do this. She introduces herself as an orphan and tells him about her hobbies before revealing that she killed 35 people in 6 months after being taken in by the Port Mafia. Meanwhile, Kaji stands over Yosano and asks her what it means to die. Surprised, she sees that the Mafia aren't so formidable after all and says he's just an idiot, so he stabs her hand with a scalpel and scatters bombs around her before walking off. As he shuts the door behind him, she manages to wedge the knife out of her hand just before the bombs explode. Atsushi realizes he can't win and wonders if these people are going to die just because they boarded the same train as him. As he's thinking about the insults thrown at him, he suddenly realizes that it would be okay for him to live if he managed to get all these people to safety. He rushes towards her, but her Demon Snow instantly rushes towards him, and he remarks that he wouldn't have been so slow if he could use his ability. Keiji returns to see Yosano's immobile body and checks if she's dead, but she suddenly punches him in the face. She slowly approaches him and asks which side she should punch him from next and strikes him once more. He disbelievingly says she was almost dead just now, so she declares that she's a doctor and tells him that death is the loss of a life. No matter how hard doctors try, some patients slip through their fingers. She reveals that her ability, Thou Shalt Not Die, can cure any wounds, even her own, but the necessary conditions are harsh, so it can only cure lethal injuries. So if she wanted to treat a half-injured patient, she would have to fatally wound her patient first. She takes out a large blade and viciously asks if he would like to be treated by her. Meanwhile, Atsushi surprisingly manages to stop Demon Snow's blades by transforming his hands into paws and swiftly closes the distance between him and Kyuko before aiming his claws at her throats. She reveals that there's a bomb strapped onto her chest, so he distressingly asks if something like this is what she really wants to do. Yoseno uses the train conductor's mic to tell Atsushi that the bomb has a remote detonator, so it'll explode in a matter of seconds if he makes one mistake, and will have to use the remote detonator's stop button to deactivate it. He asks the girl, Kyuka, for the button, so she hands it over without saying anything, but pressing it only activates the bomb. He hurriedly asks how much time they have left, but she pushes him away to protect him as he realizes her ability is always activated by a voice from her cell phone, which means she cannot control it by herself. She says she's killed 35 people and doesn't want to kill anyone else before jumping off the train. Refusing to give up, Atsushi transforms his legs into tiger paws as well and jumps after her. He quickly rips off the bomb and throws it into the air before they both fall into the river. He manages to get her to shore, but instantly collapses after that. Meanwhile, Akutogawa turns off his phone and declares that a pawn is just a pawn, no matter how powerful it may be, before asking Dazai if he's a pawn waiting to be crushed. While Yosano is treating Kyuka in the infirmary, Kunikita tells Atsushi that he's brought trouble in once again because that girl is a well-known assassin. She tricks targets into lowering their guard with her young appearance and annihilates entire organizations with her ability. She's accomplished too much too quickly, so it was only a matter of time before she got caught. Atsushi says the one to blame is whoever's taking advantage of her ability, but Kunikita tells him that gifts don't always bring advantages to their wielders. When she wakes up, Kunikita asks who the one behind this plot was because the Port Mafia forces will just keep coming. She says boiled tofu is really good and agrees to talk if they bring some for her, so Atsushi cheerily agrees, and they head to a restaurant. After eating, she asks for seconds and reveals that the Port Mafia took her, and when her parents died, they wanted her ability, which only follows orders coming through a phone. Kunikita remarks that they made good use of her ability by turning her into an assassin, and she explains that she would have been killed if she resisted them. When she tells them that a man called Akutogawa was manipulating Demon Snow through the phone, Kunikita decides to head back to the agency to report and tells Atsushi to hand Kyuka over to the military police, where she'll be sentenced to death with a kill count of 35, and even if she returned to the Port Mafia, she would be considered a traitor. He asks Atsushi if he wants to save her, and if he has the resolve to shoulder full responsibility for her. Before leaving, he warns him that they'll both end up sinking if he tries to save her, but Atsushi wonders why Dazai helped him if that's true. As he's chained, Dazai remembers when Akutogawa was a rookie, so Akutogawa tells him that he has committed a grave sin by vanishing and returning as an enemy of the Port Mafia. He punches him in the face and says he can kill him as long as he doesn't use his ability, so Dazai sees he's climbed up the ranks and admits he was a slow learner who always disobeyed instructions along with that useless ability of his. Furious, Akutogawa tells him that his fake bravado will only last for a few days and vows to obliterate the agency and seize the wearer during that time. Dazai wonders if he'll really be able to manage that since his new subordinate is far superior to him, hearing which Akutogawa swivels around to punch him again. Remembering what Kunikita said, Atsushi asks Kyuka if there's any place she wants to visit since he's got the rest of the day off, so she asks if he's asking if she would like to go on a date with him and starts blushing. He hurriedly clarifies that he didn't mean it like that before they go around the city, but she seems to know every place there because she's got the whole place memorized. They go around before she gets some creeps for herself, wins a plushie in a crane game machine, and has a ride on the Ferris wheel. As Atsushi is tiredly walking behind her, she says there's one final place she wants to visit, and they arrive at the police station. She says that she have just ended with the boiled tofu and admits she's going to be executed regardless of what she does, but Atsushi suddenly gets stabbed by Akutogawa's Rashomon from behind. He tells her that she's finished his job and reveals that there's a transmitter applied in her body, shocking her. She drops her plushie as Atsushi gets thrown into a truck and Akutogawa tells her they're going home. At the agency, Naomi watches the members worrying about Atsushi. Rampo questions why they need to save him when he's a Werediger, who has a large bounty on his head. He reminds them that they're not his foster home, and Kunikita agrees, but Tanizaki says he's one of them before Naomi remarks that it didn't look like they were going to decide anytime soon, so she brought Fukuzawa here. Kunikita apologizes for not focusing on the task, but he says that won't be necessary and orders them all to put every task they're currently working on hold until their newest member has been safely returned to them. Rampo asks him if he's sure behind this, but he says one of their own has been taken and asks what greater rationale there is for them. He orders them all to bring him back in 3 hours. Dazai remarks that it's about time and suddenly becomes terrified when he hears a familiar voice. Nakahara Chuya slowly approaches him and declares this is a great view. Disgusted, Dazai says he hasn't changed, and also Chuya says he won't be able to deceive him since after all they are both former partners, and asks what his play is here. Dazai says it's just what it looks like, get caught and wait to be executed. Chuya says there's no way he would get caught like that or else he would have killed him long ago, but Dazai remarks that he's overthinking this and inquires about why he even came here in the first place. He reveals it was to harass him and freeze him from his chains. He orders Dazai to fight him right now so they can be crushed right now along with his schemes, but Dazai opens the chains by himself and reveals he could have escaped at any time, so Chuya rushes towards him, declaring that he likes this turn of events. Meanwhile, in a meeting, Kunikida tells the agency members that they found out who the truck was owned by, which means they're the only ones outside of the port mafia who can tell them more about Atsushi's location. Tanizaki rushes into the firm's office but realizes they've been outsmarted because all the workers there have been killed. Yosano remarks that their only lead is now gone, so Fukuzawa tells Rampo it's his turn. He asks if he really has to and questions what he'll get in return, so Fukuzawa agrees to give him praise. Utterly shocked, Rampo says he doesn't have to go that far and puts his glasses on before deducing that Atsushi is currently on a vessel traveling at 20 knots towards the open sea and is alive for now. Kunikida realizes they can't touch him once he leaves the country, so Fukuzawa gives him keys to the agency's high-speed vessel docked at the port and tells him to bring Atsushi back no matter what, so he heads out and asks Atsushi to not die on him. As Kunikida hurries to catch up to Atsushi's vessel, Chuya beats up Dazai, who admits he thought he would be able to block with his right arm. Chuya realizes he's predicting his moves, so he remarks that he knows everything about his pacing, attacks, and technique, or else he wouldn't have been a good partner. Chuya starts pummeling him again and asks what good predicting these moves will do before aiming a blade at his neck and telling him to predict what happens next. He can't just go beating the hell out of this gorgeous being like that. Dazai reveals he wanted to know who's putting the bounty on the Werediger's head and says Chuya won't kill him because a meeting between the upper echelons of the Port Mafia will be happening tomorrow because of a letter he sent which stated that if Dazai was killed, all their secrets would come to light. If the public prosecutor's office gets a hold of these secrets, all the Port Mafia executives can be executed more times than they can count, so if he's executed before that decision without permission, Chuya's unsanctioned act will be considered betrayal and he'll be discharged or even executed. He tells Chuya to go ahead if he wants, so he angrily drives the blade into the wall and walks away, remarking that he was the one who got harassed instead. He vows to kill him one day and to find a woman he can die with, hearing which Dazai realizes how kind he is. Atsushi gets chucked out of the container he's stuck in as Akutogawa admits he's struck to kill, but it seems the tiger's healing is always in effect. He tells him to enjoy his last voyage before he's handed over, and Atsushi distressingly realizes he's got to find a way to escape. He wonders why Akutogawa has so much hatred for him before Kyuka points her gun at him and tells him to let Atsushi go. He angrily grabs her throat and asks if she thinks she can live a normal life outside the mafia. He tells her to either continue killing for the Port Mafia or stop breathing because worthless humans don't have any right to live. As she's being strangled, she admits he might be right, but the creeps she had with Atsushi were delicious. Kunikida suddenly calls for Atsushi before Kyuka starts detonating explosives she planted in the armory. Akutagawa questions if that man's life matters that much to her as Atsushi reaches the end of the ship and sees Kunikida's vessel below them. He realizes he's safe now as Kunikida hurriedly tells him to jump. He tells him to let the girl go because that's the kind of city they're in and the job they have. They're not heroes he's wished several times they were, but that's not true. Atsushi declares that he doesn't think that's true because Dazai and the agency didn't give up on him. He rushes back and saves Kyuka just as she's about to be stabbed by Rashuman, telling Akutagawa to face him. As they face each other, Atsushi says he can't forgive him and transforms his hand before they start fighting. He realizes he has to somehow eliminate the barrier Rashunan can create and transforms his legs to increase his speed as well. Akutagawa keeps relentlessly attacking him with Rashuman, but he swiftly dodges and admits he has to close the gap somehow. Suddenly, he jumps up from the smoke and pummels Akutagawa into the ground. He remembers the lessons Dazai gave him when he was in the Mafia as Atsushi warily falls down and decides to escape with Kyuka before the ship sinks. Rashuman suddenly stabs him from behind and Akutagawa furiously questions why it had to be him. His abilities newly learned and full of flaws, and he uses it with such poor planning, but he's the one. Alarmed, Atsushi wonders where the hate against him stems from before Akutagawa lands a brutal attack on him and thinks he's done. Atsushi still manages to get up and asks why he used her. He declares that you don't get to decide whether someone is worthy of being alive and bears the pain of all of Akutagawa's ultimate attacks before breaking Rashuma's barrier and punching him in the face, throwing him into the sea as he remembers what Dazai said. As Atsushi wearily falls down, Kyuka grabs him and slowly jumps off the ship while supporting him so Kunikita catches them with the ship and tells Atsushi he did well. Meanwhile, Dazai looks up what actual madman would want to spend 7 billion on a freaking tiger and is shocked to see the name. Francis. F remarks that the island mafia are truly a half-backed lot and vows that it will be the guilds for certain. At the agency door, Atsushi wonders if the agency will be able to look past the 35 people Kyuka has killed and slowly enters to see her dressed in a maid outfit, while the other agency members fawn over her cuteness. What a cute little gremlin. Kunikita says he tried to stop them before Rampo excitedly returns with his favorite snacks and shows them to Kyuka. Fukuzawa arrives, so Kyuka asks him to please let her stay here. Kunikita says he doesn't recommend it, not because she was with the port mafia, but because the world they live in isn't easy. Atsushi admits the mafia will find her eventually and asks why she doesn't try to get away from here, so she says she wants to prove Akutagawa wrong by doing something other than killing people. She tells Fukuzawa that she is willing to do anything and continuously says please until he finally agrees. Higuchi is standing in front of the port mafia boss who tells her that they failed to defeat the agency and capture the war tiger and even damaged one of their ships, but their efforts matter first because results aren't as important. He admits Akutagawa is competent but asks if she really thinks she's cut out for this job. As she washes his face, Jin suddenly appears behind her before Hiratsu tells Higuchi that she is their commander and it is their job to obey her, but they do so more out of fear and respect for Akutagawa's, so once that is out of the picture, there isn't much motivation left for them to follow her. When she returns home, she admits she always knew she wasn't the right fit for this job and has thought of leaving the port mafia, but has never done so. Later, she wakes up from a call and is informed that Akutagawa has been kidnapped, so she arms herself despite Hiratsu urging her to not go in alone and rushes into the warehouse. She manages to take down a few enemies but gets shot in the leg before they corner her. Suddenly, Hiratsu and the other commanders arrive with the port mafia lackeys and take down their enemies, claiming that she's their superior. She hurries to Akutagawa's side, who slowly wakes up and apologizes to her for all this, but she smiles and says it's her job. At the agency, Kunikita tells Atsushi to take care of Kyuka since he brought her in the first place, and Atsushi learns that Kenji used to live in a small village until 2 months ago before he was recruited by the president and came to the city. He happily says the city's full of new concepts and it's really fun, admitting that he hasn't quite got the hang of money yet. Neither have any of us, mate. Kunikita sees a report about a car blowing up for unknown reasons and asks Atsushi if he wants to learn the ropes of this stuff by shadowing another agent, so he enthusiastically agrees. He goes with Kenji, and they decide to ask around for information. As they're going through the market, Atsushi realizes Kenji's really popular, and they learn through one of his contacts that some people were talking about nitrogen fertilizer, which is used for making bombs. He decides to just go ask the gang here if they did it because being sincere will always result in the truth. Atsushi remarks that it must be that, and they visit the gang's base where Kenji kindly asks if they did it. When they deny it, he thanks them for their help and leaves.
Oh, thanks, man.
Outside, Atsushi hurriedly tells him that they were lying no matter how you look at it, but Kenji assures him that being sincere will lead them to the truth. The gang suddenly surrounds them, believing they found conclusive proof that they blew up the car, so Kenji thanks them for revealing the truth and effortlessly beats them all up with his super strength. Seeing him sitting on the mountain of humans, Atsushi panics and tells Kunikita he can't do this, so he calms him down and commends him for realizing that on his own. He admits Kenji is unique, but he's only that strong when he's hungry and goes to sleep once he's eaten. Atsushi learns that Kyuka will be staying in his dorm as well before a chopper lands near the agency, and the guild leader, Francis F., has a meeting with Fukuzawa. Fukuzawa asks if he was the one whose bounty targeted the agency, so he declares that he had no idea the crime mafia here would be so incompetent and offers a large amount of money to buy the agency. He says he has no reason for the members' gifts and only wants the gifted business permit that is the one thing very difficult to acquire here. Fukuzawa refuses any amounts of money he might offer because the permit is the heart and soul of the agency, so Francis leaves, telling him to keep track of the news. Kenji suddenly disappears when he sees Francis and his party out, so Kunikita sends Tanizaki with Atsushi to look for him. But as they're going, Naomi suddenly disappears. Tanizaki spots the girl behind Naomi disappearing, but she suddenly transports them to another dimension along with a man looking for a small girl named Elise. She introduces herself as Lucy and says they can win if they open the black door on one end of the room while playing tag with her doll, Anne. Tanizaki gets ready to use his ability, but Anne instantly captures him as well, and Atsushi's left alone. She says she knows how he feels because she's also stayed at an orphanage and will be thrown away by the guild if she isn't useful to them anymore. He swiftly keeps dodging for a while, but the black door doesn't open because Lucy herself doesn't know how it works. Distressed, Atsushi decides to leave to get Dese's help, but the man motivates him to keep on fighting while staying calm, so Atsushi composes himself, but suddenly gets caught. Before he's thrown into the door with the black room, he ties a ribbon around Lucy and forces her to release them all from her dimension if she doesn't want to get captured forever, as well, so she's forced to comply and they all return to the real world. Atsushi tries to ask if he can help her in any way, but she runs away. The man finds a lace and tells Atsushi that logical decisions can always be found even in the toughest of situations, so he thanks him for his help, but Kyuka, who came to find them, suddenly starts shaking in horror. The man walks off with the lace and says he had a good time, remarking that he wanted to return to the good old days and use his ability to mow down his enemies left and right. They arrive in front of the Port Mafia members who bow to him, and he's revealed as the Port Mafia leader, Mori Ogai.